Okay. All right, good afternoon everyone. So first of all, can I thank all the participants today at the Housing Roundtable, and can I confirm with Queenslanders that the summit will be held on October the 20th, and we will bring together not just the stakeholders that were there today, but also people from across Queensland. It's very important that Queenslanders are represented at this summit, because this issue is not just in the southeast, but it is across the state. Can I also extend my thanks and gratitude to the numerous youth and homelessness services out there that are working night and day to help people who are going through very difficult times. And it's affecting a lot of families, it's affecting a lot of individuals, and we've increased funding to these services, but we do acknowledge that more needs to be done. And today's conversation, can I say, was brilliant. People came with an open mind, they put their ideas on the table, and we will be doing further work with the participants to formulate the discussions and the outcomes that we expect at the summit on the 20th of October. I've also committed to putting this agenda on the National Cabinet. So National Cabinet will be, the Prime Minister will be calling that meeting for later this month, and housing is a national issue as well, so we'll be talking about it there. We've actually been asking people to come forward with ideas, and I really want to thank Griffith University that has identified a property straight away that we can utilise to help with this housing situation. They approached our government. They have 200 beds of unused student accommodation at its Mount Gravatt campus. So we are now going to work with them over the next 6 months to make these rooms available to people and service providers. So we will work with service providers to see who will come on board to partner with government here. But can I thank Griffith University? But we're now asking Queenslanders out there, businesses, organisations, church groups, if you have any properties or land that can help us, we will work with you. Already, one of the participants today identified 90 blocks of land across Queensland that they will be able to work with government with the view of putting some accommodation on those blocks of land. And government has done this very well in the past, partnering with church organisations, and that was the Catholic churches. So thank you very much for putting that on board. So we recognise that these are very complex issues, but there's been excellent conversations today, looking at those unused buildings, also looking at provision of land. We also had discussions about prefabricated homes that can readily become available. I'll be looking at some of those over the next couple of weeks. The other thing we recognise as well is that families and people want to live in their communities. You know, one of the #1 issues in my electorate of Inala, people are coming in, but they want to stay in their community of Inala. Their kids are in school. And this is likewise across the state. People want to stay in community. So we have to work with the service providers and the availability in these communities. Another great idea that was raised today, we'll explore more, is in relation to new developments. In the UK, 25% of the housing has to be for affordable or social housing of a new development. That's a great idea. I mean, so we want to explore that further as well. So these are just some of the ideas that were raised, and like I said, there's going to be a lot more work done in the lead up to the summit and of course to National Cabinet. So I'll hand over to the Deputy Premier, we've got the Treasurer here, the Housing Minister, and then we're happy to take some questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Premier. As you've just heard, we've finished a very productive housing roundtable that will set the agenda for our summit next month, as well as for the contribution the Premier will make on behalf of the state at National Cabinet. We talked through a range of short, medium and long-term proposals to address housing supply, and there was a consensus really that in an environment where there is a shortage of builders and building supplies, and where building costs are escalating, the best early gains are in repurposing underutilised buildings that are already built. And that's why this contribution from Griffith University is very valuable, allowing us to repurpose their student accommodation for 200 units of crisis accommodation. We will need to refurbish them, and that will take some time, but it is obviously quicker than building a new building and will allow us to ease that pressure sooner. Similarly, the Catholic Church has identified roughly 90 properties that we may be able to use right across the state. So I think it really underlines what we already know, that when Queenslanders and Queensland organisations decide to work together, we really can do great things, and I'm sure that's what we will see between now and the summit and onwards.
Thanks, Premier. Well, it was a great meeting this morning, and some shared collective views on some of the challenges facing housing in Queensland and some of the opportunities for the future. And we've now seen university accommodation, turning into universal accommodation, and that's a quick win that'll come out of the roundtable today as we move forward towards the summit in October. But I think we saw some shared understandings of the challenge facing housing in Queensland. We've seen higher demand because of a number of factors, and we shared that information today, including changes to household consumption, composition I should say, and interstate migration. We're seeing big constraints on the supply side as well, due to international materials shortages, rising prices and the availability of labour. So our current pipeline is at capacity, and it was interesting to hear from the Housing Industry Association, who said they have 12 months of work already on the books, carrying through all the way through 2023. ABS data is showing that while the amount of dwelling construction happening is at record levels, dwelling investment is falling because there's not enough materials and tradies to do the work. So we need to identify alternative pipelines. That's something we talked about today, or ways to make the current pipeline wider. So one of the things we're focusing on today is looking at innovative ways to create more pipelines, whether that's established current greenfield sites, infill, and existing stock available to make homes available faster for Queenslanders. So great discussion this morning, and some important work now to be done before we meet again at the round table and summit, I should say, later in October.
Thank you very much. And today's meeting was absolutely significant, where all the pieces of the puzzle were brought together by the Premier. I want to acknowledge her leadership in this space and her heartfelt commitment to managing these very complex issues across our great state. And of course, the conversations went to many areas, as you've already heard, but particularly around our immediate response to those who are experiencing homelessness. Now, we know that not every Queenslander lives in social housing, nor would they all be eligible for social housing. But there are many families and individuals who are experiencing housing stress right now, and we see that through our homelessness services. And today, when we saw all of those who are engaged in our homelessness services and our youth services, there at the table, they have been working hard with government over a couple of years now, through COVID and of course through the challenges that we're facing right now. They have been working with us through roundtables and workshops and of course task force to remedy this issue. But today, to see them amongst all of the other players in the housing sector really, I think, gave great hope to many that the discussions that we'll be having in the summit in October will very much address some of the major issues that we're facing. Of course, we had the opportunity to talk about some of the programs that we already have been putting in place. The Palaszczuk government has, of course, the $40 million Help to Home initiative, where we are seeking private investors to bring forward their properties for 2 years, a 2-year guaranteed rent, 3 months in advance, and of course that guarantee to be able to hand those properties back as part of the lease arrangements in good condition. And of course our other programs, including the $16 million immediate housing response package that the Premier and myself announced during the budget this year, supporting more funding into our homelessness services more workers in those homelessness services, and of course ensuring that we were extending our rental subsidy scheme to $10,000 over 12 months to help people stay in their rental properties or to sustain a rental property beyond that measure. All of these were discussed, and of course more ideas about how we move forward together will be very much welcomed as we lead into the summit.
Hi, Jen Williams, Queensland Executive Director of the Property Council. Given the significant role that the private sector is going to play in increasing the supply of housing in Queensland, we were delighted to be part of today's roundtable. It was only a week ago that we lodged a paper with government calling on them to quickly pull together a housing summit so that all stakeholders could join together to talk about the challenge that is housing. And so we're delighted that the Premier has shown great leadership and just a week later has brought together all the key stakeholders across the spectrum. Today's conversation was fantastic. There were about 30 people in the room across all facets of the housing industry. There are some who agreed, some who disagreed, but it was an incredibly respectful conversation. And I must say I was delighted by how much alignment of thought there was across the group. The key takeout for me was that everyone has understood that the private sector or community groups, everyone is pitching in to see how we can tackle this challenge head on. So there was conversation about the immediate issues that we're facing and how to tackle that, but then also more broadly, how do we get more rental accommodation available through institutional investment like build to rent, and then in the longer term, opening up land supply, whether that is new communities in greenfield areas or whether it's looking at infill in local government areas and making sure that we can have a diversity of housing in areas close to where people currently live. So Property Council is really grateful to be part of the conversation and again commends government for pulling people together. We are looking forward to the summit. In October, where we can explore some of these issues in more detail and figure out where we agree on things and where we can move forward.
Thanks, Jen. I'm happy to take some questions.
How long do you see this crisis housing being used for, and when will it come online at the university?
My understanding is around 6 months, but we'll be updating you as it progresses. Yep.
Who will be offered the accommodation? Premier? Will it be families or still less?
It depends who the service provider is, but my understanding is that it's single accommodation, so it would be crisis accommodation, and they'll have to decide whether it's for youth or for adults.
And how long will it take to refurbish those units?
6 months.
6 months
Yep.
to refurbish
And have it ready. Yep.
And then how long will
And look, it might be earlier. We might be able to release some earlier as they come online. But this is fantastic to see Griffith University say, here's a property, here's a part of the solution, and government can work with Griffith University for 200 units. It's fantastic.
And how long will it be available for use? Is it just ongoing? You'll be able to use?
I think so. We'll negotiate that
Do you
with them.
foresee things like this actually being able to solve the crisis in itself, or is there going to be other measures needed, like new units or new complexes built elsewhere?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and of course we have to be innovative. So remember I talked earlier about looking at some of those prefabricated homes as well. Well, at the moment you can't really rent out a granny flat on your property. So, I mean, this is an issue for seniors in our community. It's an issue for young people who might be looking at getting their first home. Being able to have a separate accommodation but on the same block of land. Now, it's not going to be able to be on every block of land, but it gives people a choice. And these prefabricated homes are new to the market now, and we're looking at seeing how we can increase their manufacture.
Will the government offer to pay for the refurbishment of vacant blocks and vacant sites to be used for emergency accommodation?
We'll be looking at that, like we've just done with this one. So if people have ideas, please bring these ideas forward to government. And like I said, government has actually worked very successfully in the past too with church organisations. So I know out in my local community, they were able to build 1- and 2-bedroom units for seniors on church land. So it's about working together to get units and properties available for people living in the community. And a lot of these people who moved into these units, for example, would have been in 3- or 4-bedroom social housing. Then they've been able to downsize into smaller accommodation that suits their needs.
Premier, you mentioned in the UK they have a certain
Yeah.
proportion
So I'm going to explore that further. I think that's really interesting. My understanding is some other states might, at the moment in Australia, be looking at 10%. So I'm not saying it's going to be 25%, but it's something that government wants to actively explore, which would mean in a new big development, 10 to 25% of the new apartments / houses coming to market have to be a combination of social housing and affordable housing, so for rent.
Do you legislate that?
Sorry?
Do you legislate
It's usually through legislation, yeah. And the other thing we've got to factor in as well, there are a lot of people out there with a disability. We need to make sure that we also have accommodation for people with a disability as well.
How long would it realistically take to introduce a standard like that, to have that minimum requirement?
Oh, usually through a legislative 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months?
Yeah.
And would you look at be bringing it in as soon as 3 to 6 months?
Well,
Or is that something you
this
wanna
is an
work out?
idea we're going to put. This was raised today.
Yep.
So this is an idea that will go to the summit. Okay, so these are all ideas, and the summit's in October, and we want to get people's input.
Can I say about the new land tax regime?
Yeah, the Treasurer's there.
Some people are concerned about the impact it could have on rents and on vacancy rates for private rentals. What modelling has the government done to see what impact the new land tax regime will have on rental prices and also on the vacancy rate?
Well, I answered that 2 days ago and provided a detailed answer there. But can I say the only mention of land tax today, the only mention today at the roundtable was in relation to properties that were formerly part of the National Rental Affordability Scheme. So no one raised closing the interstate land tax loophole as an issue in relation to affordability, because I think there's an agreement, or people understand that the real pressures are on land, on labour and supplies. So that is putting more land onto the market, making sure we've got the labour, the skilled workforce we need to build, and that's a problem at the moment, having the tradies, and then, of course, the supply chain constraints. So the cost of construction has gone up in the last financial year about 30%. For steel, it's even higher. So they are some of the constraints that are going in. There are also some other matters that were raised. A proposal to tax vacant properties differently to incentivise their use as homes. That was raised today. So that was the other tax. No, as the Premier said, I'm just letting you know what are the suggestions that have come forward. And then the Lord Mayor raised a suggestion for a statewide tax on Airbnbs. So that was another idea that came forward. Now, not all these ideas, of course, will be implemented. Not all of them will be progressed. But they were raised, and people raised them in an open and honest fashion to try and address some of the issues that our state's facing. And I think it was great. We had parties of different political persuasion there. We had the community sector, we had the property sector, we had the Housing Industry Association, we had all parts of the state who are involved in this issue, and it's a great credit to the Premier for bringing everyone together, and it was such a positive discussion. So we'll look at all of those issues. Not all of them will be implemented, but I'll just give you an idea of the context of taxation that was raised, and that wasn't raised as an issue.
The REIQ wants the land tax abolished. I mean, what are the chances of that happening?
Well, I think we need to put that in some perspective. No, we won't be abolishing it, I suppose, is the short answer. That's not the intention, and it wasn't raised, I think, because people see that closing a loophole for interstate land speculators is not the critical issue that's impacting on the affordability of land in Queensland. It affects a small segment of the market. In fact, we anticipate it's about 10,000 properties out of 2 million owners of land. So 10,000 out of 2 million, so that's about 0.5% of the total of land in Queensland. So it's not a big driver of that. Every year, tens of thousands of Queenslanders start paying land tax or pay more land tax because of the change in property values. So it's also deductible. So land tax on investment properties is deductible for income tax purposes as well. So I think people need to keep that in perspective. And it's also, you'd probably have to own 3 properties, one of them interstate, before it would become applicable. So you'd have a principal place of residence, you'd own a property in Queensland, but then you have to own an interstate property. So that is a very small group of people who are impacted. And it's an important way to bring fairness into the tax system in Queensland. It only applies, of course, to Queensland land.
You can guarantee rents won't rise as a result of the new land tax rate?
Well, I think history shows that that the impact or rents are determined not on the basis of inputs, because if that was the case, when interest rates were at record lows, rents would have gone down, but they didn't. So inputs aren't necessarily the determinant of what rents are.
The housing minister this morning spoke about sorry, it was more for the treasurer.
Oh, sorry.
She spoke about Treasury undertaking modelling of social housing for the government's future housing plan. Will we be able to see any of that modelling?
Sorry, who said that?
It was the housing minister this morning said that Treasury was undertaking modelling for a future housing plan.
No, I don't think she said that, no.
Oh, okay. So there's
Sorry, no, we're not.
what
Do you want to
modelling?
clarify?
No.
I'm happy to clarify. What I did say was that, of course, Treasury undertook the modelling to assist in the development of our action plan, and any future action plans would be determined by some of that modelling. That's the role that Queensland Treasury does for all parts of government, so that's a very important role that they play.
Would you be asking for updated modelling then?
So just keeping in mind, though, that this modelling in our current action plan came into existence just a year ago, and we put a $2.9 billion investment against that, a record investment, in fact. And we are building more social homes now as a result of that investment in line with that modelling. But today we heard very clearly from the housing industry, from the building industry, that the next 12 to 18 months is already full. The book is full. And so we are commencing as much as we can in that market. And so that indicates that in terms of the modelling, we've got the action plan right for now. But of course, future action plans would be determined, any targets would be determined by the modelling that Queensland Treasury helps with all the time.
And when you say commencement of a social home, what does that mean?
Contracts are signed and ready to go. So we are moving as quickly as we can to get things out of the ground in what is an incredibly tense market. And that was made very clear today again by all parties. The fact that we're seeing supply chain issues, the fact that weather events and, of course, the weather that we're seeing now impacting completion. And on top of that, we know that in terms of the shortage of expert skilled workers in that space has been becoming an issue as well. So all of those factors are playing their part, on top of the fact that we're seeing mass migration into our state and heavy demand for more housing. So we continue to ensure that we are not just meeting our targets, but we are exceeding our targets on every side of this of our action plan.
Graham, can we ask you about Redland City Council? Obviously, you made that big decision yesterday. The Redland City Council says they were blindsided by it, but that you didn't actually alert them to it. Can you tell us what conversations you had with the Redland City Council, and also are there any other councils that you're looking at taking over the city plan for?
Well, Redland City Council has been told numerous times over recent years that they need to update their housing strategy. I wrote to them last year and indicated I intended to direct them to update their housing strategy. I wrote again in June of this year. I spoke to the Mayor by telephone ahead of the decision that I took this week for the state to step in and assist them to update their housing strategy. Their housing strategy is based on 2006 population data. It is well overdue to be updated. It was a plan to run to 2031, but they have already almost used all of the intended accommodation stock to 2031. So that's nearly 10 years away. It's timely now that they should update, that we should assist them to update their housing strategy, and that's what we will do. There are other local government areas where they also need to update their housing strategies, but they are at least more advanced. They aren't just refusing to do it, and so we'll allow them to continue that work while we work with Redlands, and once we've completed the housing strategy in Redlands, we can then look at where the other local government areas are up to.
What are those other local government areas you're looking at?
There's a range of local government areas where their housing strategies are outdated. Brisbane is in the process of updating theirs, and we're certainly eager to see that progress. But in the case of Redlands, the advice was the advice to me was that even though they had been put on notice over many years, including my notice to them 12 months ago, they were unlikely to progress their housing strategy, and therefore it was the area where the need was most urgent for state assistance.
Just Brisbane and Redlands, no other ones?
The housing issues in each of our regions, they vary slightly, but in the case of Redlands, we were most concerned that their housing strategy needed to be updated.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just saying there's suggestions it's a bit of a partisan attack, which is why there's this back and forth. And you've named two LNP-like councils there. Are there other Labor councils you're looking at? What's the background of that?
Well, this is simply based on the current situation, the status of their current housing strategies. As I say, Brisbane are working on updating theirs, and that's very good. We'll assist them in any way they ask us to. But in the case of Redlands, they were unable to update their housing strategy, have been unable to, despite our direction to do so. And so I determined it was appropriate, given the concern about housing availability and affordability across the southeast in particular, that updating the Redlands housing strategy was important.
The council saying it's waiting though for population data, the latest data from the government, that the latest data set they've received is outdated, but it's been waiting for a new set of population indicators from the government. Is it your job to do that? Does that come up?
They haven't raised that with me, but I guess one of the advantages of the state being much more involved in the development of the strategy is we will have full access to all of that data, all of that planning information. We'll be able to bring it to bear.
What do you say to Redlands residents who are concerned about the impact of higher density living ruining or impacting their lifestyle?
Oh, this is all about making sure people in the Redlands can afford to have a roof over their heads. It's about making sure that young people growing up in Redlands can live in Redlands. It's about people who perhaps their kids have left home, they don't still need a big 4 or 5 bedroom house, making sure they have an option so that they can move somewhere and still be close to the community they've lived their lives in, hopefully where their kids are growing up too. So this is all about making sure there are affordable housing options for people in the Redlands.
Premier, can I ask you about Pinkenba? The Lord Mayor has been suggesting that Pinkenba can be used as a emergency accommodation sites similar to the ones you've been raising today. Is that something you'll be asking the federal government to look at?
Oh, look, of course we're happy to liaise with the federal government on that, but everyone should be aware, and it was actually presented today at the roundtable, that service providers have been out there and looked at Pinkenba, and they themselves have said it's unsuitable. It's very isolated, it's away from services, going back to, people want to stay in their communities, but all options are on the table. So we're happy to facilitate. If there's other service providers that want to go and have a look, we're happy to facilitate that with the federal government.
Have you heard back from Julie Collins yet? Is she going to come to your summit in October?
The Housing Minister, we will invite her, yes, of course. We'll invite her.
The opposition?
Yes, I said that the other day, yes.
Premier, the international migration is expected to grow
Yes.
substantially in Australia to help with the workforce shortages.
Yep.
Is there any modelling, or do you have a cap on the number of people who will be allowed into Queensland, or are you considering that?
Those numbers, that was a very good question. There's some preliminary discussions that happened at the Jobs and Skills Summit where the numbers are being increased, and I think Queensland roughly gets around 20% of that national migration intake. So that is another reason that this needs to be a national cabinet issue, because everybody is going to feel the effects of increased migration that's already sitting on top of a housing market that's very stressed.
Premier, a couple of other issues.
Yeah, sure.
Bikies, they're obviously going to call for stronger laws. Do you think our laws are strong enough as they are? I mean, even if you don't think we need to return to the blood laws of the previous union government, do you think they need to be tightened at all?
Our serious organised crime laws went through extensive consultation, and they are currently under the 5-year review that will be handed to government in January. Secondly, can I say that there is an active police investigation occurring at the moment on a particular incident, and I won't comment any further whilst there's that police investigation.
And on separate matter again,
Yep.
the Logies, we're hearing that there's been a deal signed for the Logies to move to the Gold Coast of Brisbane. Is that something you're aware of?
Look, my understanding is that up front to say I'm having conversations with the Mayor, Tom Tate. Tom is very keen to have it secured on the Gold Coast, and I'm happy to do everything we can to facilitate. It is a signature event there on the Gold Coast, so we are fighting very hard to keep that event there.
Do you think it'll stay?
I don't know.
On Youth Justice, 7:30 had a program
Yeah.
last night saying that the government's crackdown last year is seeing young people being held in watch houses again for days, even weeks on end. Can you promise that under these changes we're not seeing a revert back to what we saw in the Four Corners program a few years ago?
Yeah, well, very good question. So look, for the outset, Minister Linar is probably better able to comment further on that, but I know that our $500 million investment is having an impact. We're seeing more services able to deal with young people, but also too there's been a 30% increase in our detention capacity at the moment. So in relation to the particulars about the watch houses, if you could direct that to Minister Linar. Okay, thanks everyone.
Tesla. Tesla.
Last one, lucky
Tesla.
last, Jack.
Thank you. Tesla's indicated this week that they want to invest more in Australia. Would you welcome Tesla to Queensland to do more manufacturing?
I would love Tesla to come to Queensland. In fact, I think it was either 2016 or 2017, I went to the big factory they were building out at Nevada. So happy to facilitate any discussions there.
Just want to clarify maybe with the Deputy Premier on
Yep.
the housing supply expert panel. When I met earlier this month, the website indicates it only met once since 2020 March of 2021. Is the website accurate there? Only met formally in that regard?
No, I understand that the website isn't accurate. I'm happy to provide you the meeting details too. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all right. It's a formal one.